You guys just keep asking for the more Reddit stories. So, I'm ready with the new tale. Let's read some cool, interesting cheating wife Reddit stories. And guys, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year, and I think we can do it. So please subscribe and let's get straight into this one.
I've come across many stories, and a lot of them have a kind of heart-wrenching sadness that sticks with you. Some of those stories really get under your skin, the bitterness and betrayal leaping off the page. I don't know if I can evoke that same intensity in my story, but it's still a tale of loss. It's not quite as sharp as some of the others, but maybe it offers something different. A reminder that time and a little patience can help heal even the deepest wounds. It's strange to even think about these events now. So much time has passed. Why am I writing this? Maybe it's to show that good things can eventually emerge even after you've been broken down to your lowest point. Or maybe I just want to tell my story, one that still feels relevant despite the years that have gone by. Time has a funny way of dulling the edges of pain, doesn't it? I'll admit, this might get long-winded, but the background is important. It sets the stage for everything that came after. And here's where I need your advice, your perspective. Is it crazy to even think about starting over? At my age, 60, it feels like a gamble, one I'm not sure is worth taking. I met my wife Allison over 20 years ago. We were together for nearly 10 years, with 7 of those spent married. Together we had 2 kids, both of whom are now fully grown and living their own lives. Funny enough, we met on a blind date, and let's just say the whole night was awkward. Allison was strikingly beautiful, full of life, with a contagious energy that drew people in. Me? Well, I've always been on the quieter side. I wouldn't call myself unattractive, but I'm far from the guy that turns heads when I walk into a room. I'm just normal. Allison had a way of lighting up a space, with her laugh, her kindness. She was always the one people gravitated toward, while I tended to blend into the background. Still, despite our differences, she took an interest in me, and for reasons I couldn't quite grasp at the time, our relationship blossomed. Eventually, we got married. Life was good, really good, actually. We had a nice home, steady finances, families who supported us, and a circle of friends that made us feel fortunate. Our kids were thriving. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But as with so many of these stories, there's always a moment when everything shifts, when things fall apart. For us, that moment came with a 3rd pregnancy. We already had our 2 kids and wanted a 3rd. Why not, right? Our family was happy, so adding another child seemed like the perfect way to make things even better. We didn't have any trouble conceiving, and soon enough, Allison was pregnant. I was thrilled when she told me the news. We waited a few months before sharing it with our families, and in those early days, we were busy preparing, planning for a nursery, discussing the future with the kids, balancing finances. Then, out of nowhere, everything changed. I still remember the day Allison called me. Her voice was shaky as she said, "Something's wrong." My heart sank. We rushed to the hospital, hoping for the best, but the universe had other plans. Allison lost the baby at 6 months. It was devastating, a punch to the gut that neither of us saw coming. The drive home the next day was cloaked in silence, the weight of loss suffocating us. Allison disappeared into the bedroom that night and didn't come out for days. She was drowning in grief, convinced she had failed as a wife, as a mother. No matter how many times I told her it wasn't her fault, that this was out of our control, she couldn't hear me. She carried that weight alone, sinking deeper into a dark depression. It took months for her to pull herself out of it. Slowly, she seemed to come back to life. She was more present with the kids again, and we even started talking about the future, what it might look like now. She started taking better care of herself, exercising more, getting back into shape. She looked incredible, and I loved reminding her of that. I made sure to tell her how much I adored her, how much she meant to me. For a while, it felt like things were returning to normal. One day, she mentioned wanting to get a part-time job. It wasn't about the money. She just needed something to do, a way to escape the house and engage with the world again. I thought it was a great idea and told her to go for it. I figured she'd look for something that suited her degree in business, but to my surprise, she took a job as a waitress and bartender at a local restaurant just down the road from us. At first, it didn't make much sense to me. Why work in a restaurant when she had a degree? But she explained it was about the flexibility. A corporate job would demand too much, and this way, she could stay connected to home and the kids. Plus, she needed to talk to adults again, to feel part of something outside of the family. I understood and supported her all the way. Now, it's worth mentioning again, Allison is a beautiful woman, and after months of getting in shape and focusing on herself, she was absolutely stunning. She has always attracted attention from men, but I never worried about it. She was loyal and I trusted her completely. Or at least, I thought I did. Allison started her new job, and for a while, everything seemed to be going fine. She worked a couple of nights a week, mostly Fridays and Saturdays. I'll admit, I wasn't entirely comfortable with some of the outfits she wore to work. They weren't inappropriate, but they definitely highlighted her figure more than I was used to seeing her show off. It's not like I didn't appreciate how good she looked. She was stunning. But part of me wished she'd dress a little more conservatively, especially when she was heading into a place full of strangers. Whenever I mentioned it, she'd just laugh and tease me, saying it was all part of getting better tips. She even joked that maybe her outfits would spark a little more romantic interest from me. I'd smile, but I wasn't really laughing. The restaurant she worked at was run by a decent guy, Greg, who had built a solid business. He was fair to his employees, and it was a family affair. His wife and kids worked there, too. His son, on the other hand, was a different story. Jackson, Greg's son, was the kind of guy who'd been handed everything on a silver platter. I could see it the moment I met him. He oozed arrogance, the type of confidence that comes from never really having to work for anything in life. He flaunted his wealth, his flashy car, his muscles from endless hours at the gym, and his conquests with women, which he never hesitated to brag about. He was around Allison's age and, I'll admit, a good-looking guy. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who turns heads. He was married, though he and his wife didn't have kids yet. His wife, Sophie, was sweet, kind. Honestly, too good for him. She helped manage the restaurant's finances while Jackson was supposed to handle catering and special events. But from what I heard, he barely lifted a finger, dumping his responsibilities on others whenever he could. I never liked Jackson. From the first time I met him, I could tell he was a loudmouth, a man full of himself with no real substance. Allison mentioned a few times how attractive he was, though she'd always follow it up by calling him an arrogant jerk. She couldn't stand his attitude, but had no choice but to work alongside him, so she kept her feelings to herself. At least, that's what I thought. Over the next few months, things started to feel off. Allison's behavior changed in subtle, unsettling ways. She was glued to her phone, always checking her messages or slipping off to make calls when she thought I wasn't looking. She began coming home later than usual, saying the restaurant was busy or that she'd stayed to help clean up after closing, and she'd disappear for hours during the day, claiming she was running errands or shopping, but nothing about it felt right. She was more distant, too, not just from me, but from the kids. Allison had always been a devoted mother, but now she seemed distracted, almost impatient with them. She handed over more and more of the parenting duties to me, which wasn't easy since I worked full-time and was the primary provider for our family. When I asked her what was going on, she brushed me off, insisting that everything was fine and that I was imagining things. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, just the two of us at home. I reached for her, thinking we could reconnect in the way couples do, but she pulled away. Cold, distant. Something in her eyes told me this wasn't just a bad night or a passing mood. I asked her what was wrong, and to my shock, she started crying. her whole body trembling as she tried to form the words. My heart pounded in my chest, an uneasy dread crawling through me. Finally, she looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, and said words that hit me like a sledgehammer. "I've been seeing Jackson." I stared at her, dumbfounded, not sure I had heard her right. "What?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, praying I was mistaken. She wiped her eyes, trying to steady herself, but the next words shattered any hope I had left. "It's been going on for almost 6 months. I didn't want it to happen, but it did. We've been sleeping together. I love him, Nick. I'm sorry, but we're done. I'm leaving you." I felt the ground beneath me shift, the world collapsing around me in a way I never imagined possible. "You love him?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What about us? What about our family?" She shook her head, unable to look me in the eye. "Something in me changed after the miscarriage. I've been miserable for months, Nick. I tried to keep it together, but something between us died that day. I need a fresh start. Jackson, he makes me feel alive again." I was stunned. She was talking about this man, this shallow, arrogant man, as if he were her salvation. I pleaded with her to reconsider, to think about our children, our life together. But her mind was made up. She had already found an apartment with him and planned to move in soon. The thought of her leaving to be with him, it was unbearable. But the worst part was when she told me she wanted the kids to stay with me, to maintain some stability for them in our family home. She'd still be there to see them, she said, but her life would now revolve around Jackson. I was absolutely floored. I could barely comprehend how we'd gone from a happy family to this. I asked her how she could even think of leaving us for a man like him. She tried to explain, saying she thought I had noticed her unhappiness long before this, and that the miscarriage had been the final nail in the coffin for our marriage. Hearing that she had been with Jackson for 6 months, behind my back, in secret, was like a knife twisting in my gut. They hadn't just been sneaking around, they'd been meeting up in his car, at hotels, and even at our own home when no one else was there. The betrayal was deep, and the hurt was immeasurable. How had I been so blind? How had I missed this? But somehow, in that moment of devastation, I managed to keep my cool. I didn't scream, didn't lose control. I just stood there trying to wrap my head around how my life had unraveled so completely, so quickly. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. A whirlwind of tears, desperate conversations, and the weight of sadness pressing down on every moment. My family, especially my dad, was furious. He wasted no time unleashing his anger at Allison, calling her every name in the book. He saw her as a betrayer, someone who had broken our family apart, and he didn't hold back. His words were like daggers, sharp and full of venom. As much as I was hurt, I knew I couldn't let things spiral into a pit of hate. I had to intervene. "She's still the mother of your grandchildren," I told him one evening after a particularly vicious rant. "Whatever she did to me, we still have to respect her for that. This isn't about revenge, Dad. It's about our family. I need her in our kids' lives, and they need her to still be their mom, even if things have changed." To my surprise, he listened. He saw how serious I was about keeping things civil for the sake of the children, and though it was clear he didn't agree, he backed off. He even complimented me on how I was handling the situation, telling me he couldn't imagine keeping his composure if he were in my shoes. It felt strange, receiving praise when my whole life was falling apart. I wanted to scream, to rage, to curse the world and Allison for what she had done, but I kept reminding myself that revenge wouldn't get me anywhere. She was the mother of my kids, and no matter how deeply she had wounded me, I couldn't let that destroy the one thing that still mattered: their sense of stability. Don't get me wrong. There were days when I fantasized about being the world's biggest jerk in response. But after thinking long and hard, I made my choice. I would take the high road. Eventually, Allison moved out and into the apartment she had found with Jackson. I watched her drive away that day, her car loaded with boxes, and it felt like she was ripping the last piece of our old life from my chest. She came by regularly to see the kids, though. At least she didn't vanish from their lives. I saw the pain in her eyes when she'd see them, the regret that lingered just beneath the surface. But it was clear she had made her decision and wasn't looking back. As for Jackson's wife, Sophie, I couldn't help but feel terrible for her. She had been blindsided by all of this, and she had to endure the humiliation of it in front of the whole community. Eventually, she left the restaurant, moved back to Pennsylvania, and filed for divorce. I'd see her occasionally at the grocery store before she left town, and every time I'd offer a quick nod, wishing her nothing but the best. From what I've heard, she's doing well now, remarried to a good man, with a family of her own. Honestly, that's probably the best thing that could have happened to her. Losing Jackson was her greatest stroke of luck, though I doubt she saw it that way at the time. The divorce itself was almost too smooth. We divided our assets, and Allison got a chunk of money, nothing outrageous, but enough to help her get on her feet. I agreed to pay alimony for 6 months, though, honestly, I would have paid just about anything to be free of the whole mess. Financial freedom felt like a small price to pay to escape the emotional devastation. We worked out joint custody, and I became the primary parent. She had visitation rights, and I made it clear that she was always welcome to see the kids. Despite everything, I still wanted her to be involved in their lives for their sake. Every now and then, when she'd come by to pick up the kids, I thought I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something. Regret. Longing. Or maybe it was just my imagination, wishing there was some part of her that still felt a connection to the life we had built together. She didn't make much money, but she made sure to pay her child support on time, and I gave her credit for that. I could tell she was trying, even if things had fallen apart. Looking back, it's clear to me that the miscarriage broke something in her, maybe in both of us. I'm no saint, but I refuse to believe the Allison I married, the woman I knew before all of this, would have thrown away our family for a guy like Jackson if she had been in her right mind. But I was powerless to stop the spiral. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, knowing there was nothing I could do to steer us off course. The day we finalized the divorce was surreal. We met at her lawyer's office, and I was struck by how at ease she seemed. She wasn't somber or reflective like I had expected. She was almost happy. She sat there next to Jackson, who had the nerve to show up with her, as if this was some grand victory for them both. It felt like a slap in the face, seeing them together. I had braced myself for the sadness, but seeing her look so content, almost giddy, hit me harder than I thought it would. The only time she faltered was when I spoke. I had been thinking about what I wanted to say for weeks. I'd even written it down and rehearsed it, determined to walk away with some dignity, with the last word. As I signed the final papers, I looked her in the eye and delivered my speech. "I'm sad this is how things ended," I began, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I thought we had a good life together. We were a team. I'm sorry if you felt I let you down, if you thought I couldn't give you the happiness you needed. I can't pretend to understand all the reasons why this happened, but I do believe the miscarriage changed something for us. Tragedies like that, they either bring people closer together or tear them apart. I guess for us it was the latter." I paused, watching her face, trying to read her expression. She seemed taken aback, almost like she hadn't expected me to say anything at all. "But it's done now. All I want is for you to find the happiness you're searching for. And I hope we can work together to give our kids the best life possible. That's all that matters now." I could see something flicker across her face, A brief moment of shock, maybe even guilt. But it was gone just as quickly as it came. She looked away, back toward Jackson, and I knew that was it. Whatever connection we once had was truly gone. The room fell into an eerie silence after I finished my speech. Allison's face went pale, and in that brief moment, I saw it. Regret. But it was fleeting, as if she quickly realized the life she had chosen, the one sitting beside her. I stood up, reached out to shake her hand, and wished her well. "Goodbye," I said, with a finality that lingered. Her lawyer promised to send me a copy of the finalized divorce papers, but that wasn't the weight on my mind. It was the strange feeling that, despite everything, this chapter of my life had truly closed. At first, things seemed to settle into some form of normalcy. Allison was living with Jackson, the guy she had left me for, and while I'd heard bits and pieces about their new life together, I didn't pry. I just kept my focus on the kids and my own routine. I couldn't avoid the restaurant forever, though. I still ordered takeout from time to time. The owner, Jackson's father, always greeted me awkwardly when I came by. There was this air of embarrassment about him, especially since his son had not only wrecked his marriage, but was now playing house with my ex-wife. The owner was a family man, and one day, after a bit of small talk, he confided in me. "I don't know where I went wrong with him," he admitted. His face was drawn, tired from years of disappointment. I didn't have much to say to that. It wasn't my place to tell him how to feel about his own son, but it was clear that his flashy lifestyle and disregard for responsibility had become a source of shame. Jackson had deserted his wife, caused a spectacle, and his father could barely look me in the eye. I never lingered at the restaurant after that. Too much tension, too many memories. And, as expected, the exciting new couple started to unravel. The cracks in their relationship showed up sooner than I anticipated. Jackson, as it turned out, was exactly who I thought he was. He drank too much, was lazy, and apparently didn't have a clue what it meant to be in a real relationship. Worse yet, he'd already started chasing after another woman, some younger girl who worked at another one of his father's restaurants. It was around this time that Allison started calling me. At first, it was subtle. Small complaints about Jackson, things that seemed trivial. But gradually, the calls became more frequent and more personal. She lamented about her life and how things weren't what she thought they'd be. "You were my best friend," she said once, her voice breaking slightly over the phone. "I could always talk to you." I stayed calm, though inside it felt like a whirlwind. "That might have been true once," I told her, "but things have changed. You need to work this out with him, not me." There was a pause on the line, and when she responded, I could hear the hurt, the regret. But I stood firm. I couldn't be her emotional crutch anymore. She had made her choice. And then came the night that nearly pushed me over the edge. She had the kids over at her apartment with Jackson for a sleepover, watching movies. It seemed innocent enough, until I got a frantic call from Allison. Jackson had gotten drunk again and was furious that the kids didn't want to watch whatever show he had chosen. My youngest daughter had refused, and in his drunken rage, he slapped her. Hard. I can still remember the way my heart raced when I heard the words. I didn't hesitate. I rushed over, ready to do something I'd regret. But instead, I took the kids and told Jackson, in no uncertain terms, that if I ever heard of him laying a hand on them again, my next call would be to the police. I admit it gave me some grim satisfaction to turn to Allison and say, "And this is what you left me for?" She didn't say a word, just hung her head. For once, I saw real shame in her eyes. Later that night, there was a knock at my door. It was Allison, sobbing, broken. She told me she had left Jackson and wanted to come home. I stood there looking at her, the woman I had loved for years, the mother of my children. Part of me wanted to take her back, to tell her that we could fix this. But after everything that had happened, I knew we couldn't go back to what we once were. I love you, I told her. And we have a lot of history. But I can't do this. Too much has happened, and I don't think it's right for you to come back. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to say. But deep down, I knew it was the truth. I couldn't just abandon her, though. I let her in, helped her call her parents, and drove her to their house. When we arrived, her father met me at the door. He thanked me, told me I'd always been a good man, a good husband to his daughter. I remember feeling a strange sense of pride in that moment, like I had done the right thing, even though it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. Allison stayed with her parents for about a year after that. Slowly, she started putting her life back together. She got a good job, eventually moved into her own place, and her energy, the spark that I had fallen in love with, returned. It wasn't a perfect situation, but there was a sense of normalcy again, at least for the kids. She was always a good mother, even when everything else fell apart. She dated a few people during that time, but none of the relationships lasted. I think she got taken advantage of more than once, and I could tell it weighed on her. Every so often, she would tell me that I had been the best relationship she ever had, that no one else compared. Maybe it was just cheap talk, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't like hearing it. But that's all it ever was. Words. Nothing romantic ever happened between us again. We kept things cordial, respectful, for the sake of the kids. In the end, I knew I could have been with her again if I wanted to, but I couldn't take that step. Not after everything that had happened. In my heart, I wanted to. But the fear of being hurt again, that was stronger. And so we moved forward in our separate lives. We coexisted, co-parented, and though we would always have our history, I knew some things were best left in the past. During this time, I had dated several women, but nothing ever turned serious. Some of them wanted more, a deeper relationship, even a future together, but I couldn't go there. After what I had been through, I wasn't interested in marriage or anything long-term. I had my kids, my work, and frankly, I had become comfortable with the idea of being on my own. The thought of diving back into something that could bring up old pain just wasn't worth it to me. I figured going solo was the safest route. The years, as they do, passed by quicker than I realized. My kids grew up, went to college, and started their own careers and families. Life, despite its ups and downs, moved forward. My ex-wife, Allison, remained a part of my life, though our interactions were mostly at family events, weddings, birthday parties, and the like. Each time I saw her, she'd ask the same question. Was I seeing anyone? And inevitably, she'd circle back to whether there was still a chance for us to get back together. My answer never changed. No, I would tell her, with a firmness that grew easier to deliver over time. Some things, once they happen, stick with you. You can't just walk away from them. Her face would always fall, that same look of sadness and regret clouding her features. She often admitted to me that leaving me was the worst decision she had ever made. She'd say there wasn't a day that went by where she didn't think about what might have been, about how different life could have turned out. I remember one conversation in particular after a family wedding. She told me that events like these, weddings, birthday parties, and especially funerals, were the hardest for her. The day her parents died, seeing me at their funerals, was especially painful because I was there, but not as her husband or her support. She admitted that on days like those, she felt utterly alone, haunted by the choices she made. Allison told me that the weddings of our children had also been bittersweet for her. She said that she had envisioned those days as ones we would share together, as a united front, proud parents. Instead, she stood there watching me from across the room, always reminded of the life she gave up. She asked me once if I ever felt the same way, if I had any regrets about how things had turned out. I was honest with her. Yes, it's sad, I said, but I chose to move forward. I can't dwell on the past. It wouldn't do either of us any good. The irony of her regret was never lost on me. She had been so sure, so confident that happiness lay with someone else. Now, years later, that decision seemed to weigh heavier on her than anything else. For me, there were moments of sadness, but I had made peace with the past. I wasn't angry anymore. I just didn't feel there was any point in revisiting it. Now, here we are, both of us pushing 60. I had started thinking seriously about retiring, or at least cutting back on work and spending some time somewhere warm, especially during the cold months. My kids were grown, they supported whatever I chose to do, and they still had a close relationship with their mother. But I could sense that the next chapter of my life was approaching. The last significant conversation I had with Allison was at a birthday party for one of our grandchildren. She pulled me aside, asking to speak alone. We stepped outside, and as soon as we did, she became emotional, almost breaking down right in front of me. I hadn't seen her like that in years. She told me that she had always held on to this hope that one day we might get back together. She believed, somewhere in the back of her mind, that there was still a chance for reconciliation. But my talk of moving away, of possibly starting a new life somewhere warmer, made it clear to her that our story, as far as she was concerned, was truly over. "I've spent a lifetime regretting what I did," she said through tears. "I failed as a wife, and I've had to live with that every day." I stood there listening, feeling the weight of her words. There was nothing more to say. Life had moved on for both of us, even if it hadn't for her in the same way. I felt compassion for her, even a little bit of sorrow, but I didn't feel responsible for her regrets. We had both made our choices, and though hers had been more impulsive, we were both living with the consequences. I reached out, gave her a hug, and told her, "We did our best. That's all anyone can ask, but we both have to keep moving forward." That's how I left things with her, that evening and in my heart. It was time to start the next chapter, whatever that would look like, and while the past would always be a part of me, I wasn't going to let it define my future. Life had given me plenty of lessons, some of them hard, some of them bittersweet. But I had learned how to stand on my own, and that was something I was proud of. I told her that so many years had passed, and that she shouldn't carry the weight of regret anymore. I reassured her that I had nothing but respect and admiration for her. Then she asked if she could possibly come visit me. I wasn't sure how to respond, but promised her I would think about it. I'll admit, every time I looked into her beautiful green eyes, my heart would melt. And that day, she looked especially beautiful. The years had been kind to her, and despite everything, in that moment I felt an intense love for her, perhaps even more powerful than I had ever felt before. At this stage in life, I found myself wondering if maybe a relationship with her again wouldn't be such a bad idea. Marriage wasn't something I was considering, but what did I have to lose at this point? She had made me happy once, and if I was being honest with myself, the love I had for her had never truly faded. Maybe, after all these years, we could try again. Update. I've been spending my winters in the Carolinas, and my ex-wife did come to visit. It sounds crazy, I know, but the old feelings came flooding back as if they had never left. She stayed with me at my place, and we spent our time doing all kinds of things together. What was meant to be a weekend visit turned into 2 weeks, and before I knew it, she had stayed for a month. One night, she broke down, sobbing, apologizing for what happened all those years ago. She told me that the past few weeks had brought her so much joy, but they also resurfaced the deep regret she had carried all this time. She admitted to spending years chasing some idealized version of a relationship that didn't exist. I told her the past was the past and maybe it was time for us to move forward. I confessed that my love for her had never died, and I asked her if she would consider staying with me for good. I wasn't interested in marriage again, but at this stage of life, did it really matter? She agreed. In fact, she never left my home after that conversation, and we've been doing great ever since. When we told the kids, their faces were a mix of shock and happiness. My youngest daughter, though, said she wasn't entirely surprised. She always knew I still loved her mother and had a feeling that things weren't truly over between us. Some people might think I'm crazy for giving this relationship another shot after everything we went through. But at this point in our lives, love and respect are what matter most. The mistakes we made decades ago are behind us. Now, when I look at her, I don't feel any anger or resentment, only love. I truly believe the years ahead will be some of our best as we enter this new chapter together. Yes, my wife made a bad decision all those years ago, but that's in the past. We both faced the consequences, but now we're moving forward. I always imagined our life together as a book, one we had started writing long ago. I used to feel sad that we would never get to finish that story. But now, I'm pleased to say we're back on track, and we're writing those final chapters together. Will my wife cheat again? I don't believe she would. Not at this stage in our lives. But one thing age and experience has taught me is that we're all a mix of good and bad. A single action or decision doesn't define a person. I have my own regrets, too. I regret letting my sadness dictate my choices. Maybe I should have recognized sooner that she, like all of us, is human and capable of making mistakes. Perhaps if I had been willing to forgive earlier, things could have turned out differently for us. My wife, Jennifer, I also think
42,
about the what-ifs, and but in
Mark,
the end,
44,
I'm grateful for
have
this
been married
second
for
chance
19
we've been
years.
given. We've been
And with
together
that,
for 25 years.
I'll conclude.
And we have 3 amazing kids.
I hope my story
all
gives
under
some
the
of
age
you a
of
new
14.
perspective to consider.
Life was steady, but in 2015, Jennifer's world was shaken. She lost her mother to cancer, and just a year later, in 2016, her father passed away from the same illness. It was like life drained out of her, and she sank into a deep, suffocating depression. For the next 2 years, I shouldered the responsibilities of the kids while Jennifer threw herself into her job, trying to cope. It was a tough time for our marriage. Our once lively bedroom turned into a cold, empty space. Nothing seemed to bring her joy, and in a way, I started to lose her without even realizing it. She shut me out, and in the silence, I found myself filling the void by playing video games after the kids went to bed. It wasn't long before those quiet nights became routine. 2 long years passed. Slowly, Jennifer started to pull herself out of the darkness. She talked more, smiled a little more, and even began making plans for the family again. We started reconnecting physically, though something between us still felt fragile. Just as we were beginning to find our rhythm again, I was hit with my own tragedy. I lost my father. We were incredibly close, and his death tore a hole in me. Like Jennifer, I withdrew, locking myself away from her, from life. I started playing video games more, using them as an escape, not realizing how much I was neglecting her. But here's the thing. I never stopped loving her. Even in my grief, I made sure she knew that. I still told her I love you every day, still gave her hugs, still took her out when I could. But it wasn't enough. We started sleeping in separate rooms because our son had a medical condition that required constant attention during the night. So I slept in his room, keeping watch over him. I even moved my Xbox in there and played until I was too tired to stay awake. Then came COVID. Everything changed. The kids' school went remote and Jennifer started working from home. Her job required her to look for supplies to reopen her business once the restrictions lifted, so she began working closely with one of her colleagues. At first it seemed harmless, just work, but after a few months, she grew distant again. This time it felt different, more troubling. I kept trying to show her I loved her. I'd leave little gifts, say sweet things, but it was like I wasn't even there. We made the decision to keep the kids home for remote learning during the 2020 to 2021 school year, especially because of our son's medical condition. I was so overwhelmed with their schooling that I didn't immediately notice how much worse things had gotten between us. The distance between Jennifer and me grew into a canyon. Our bedroom was cold again, a dead space where there used to be life. Then, during the summer of 2021, I started driving for Lyft to make some extra money. Jennifer worked from home on the days I drove so she could be around for the kids. One evening, I picked up a woman from the airport. She was on the phone with a friend, talking about meeting her affair partner at a hotel for a weekend tryst. Her husband was at home with the kids, clueless, too wrapped up in his own world to even notice. As I listened, my stomach churned. She could have been describing me. From that day on, I tried harder. I was already a loving husband, but I pushed myself to be even more affectionate, more present. But it didn't matter. Jennifer remained distant, like a shadow of the woman I once knew. The gap between us only widened. I wrote her a letter, pouring my heart out, telling her I knew things were off between us and that I wanted to fix it. I begged her to work with me on rebuilding what we'd lost. She said she'd try, but the truth was, nothing changed. For the next year, she barely touched me, and sex was non-existent. She blamed her antidepressants, which had killed her sex drive, but I knew it wasn't just the pills. She wouldn't even say she loved me unless I said it first. When we were in the car, she would fall asleep, avoiding any chance of conversation. Then came May 4th, Star Wars Day, a day that should have been lighthearted and fun, something we both used to enjoy. Jennifer went into the office that day, and I texted her a few times throughout the day but got no response. It wasn't unusual. She sometimes had poor reception at work. Later that evening, she finally called me. I told her I'd been texting her, and she explained she hadn't received them until she left the office. I suggested using Google Chat since it shows up on her work computer. But when I messaged her there, nothing. No response. That night, after the kids were in bed, Jennifer took a shower. I don't know what possessed me, but something inside me broke. I couldn't take the silence anymore. I needed to know what was going on. So, for the first time in our marriage, I checked her phone. I shouldn't have, but I did. May 4th is a big day for Star Wars fans, and Jennifer is no exception. She had sent May the 4th gifts, cute, playful, something she would normally share with me. But this time, they weren't for me. She had sent them to him. Not once had she thought to send them to me, her husband, the guy she claimed to love. And that's when I saw it. The truth. She had been having an affair for nearly 3 years. The guy lived in Kansas, but he came to the office once a month, staying in town for a week. Their conversations were full of, "I miss you," and "I love you," the kind of words I hadn't heard from her in so long. I felt like an idiot. All this time, I had been trying so hard to fix something that was already broken beyond repair. I was devastated, shattered into a million pieces. After my surgery, we made the decision to move closer to family, hoping that maybe a change of scenery would help us rebuild what was left of our relationship. But Jennifer barely lifted a finger to help. She was distant again, almost disinterested, and I was the one scouring real estate listings while juggling the recovery and the kids. Something still didn't feel right, and my gut wouldn't let it go. In October, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked her phone again. I wasn't searching for trouble, but I needed answers. What I found surprised me. It seemed like her affair had ended back in June, right before my surgery. Apparently, her lover, frustrated that she had to care for me and the kids, had pulled away. It made sense now why Jennifer had suddenly started acting more affectionate after I healed. She was trying to bury her guilt by pretending everything was fine between us. Maybe she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. Fast forward to last week. We got into a massive argument, something that had been brewing under the surface for weeks. She had become distant again, the same pattern as before. This time, though, I couldn't hold back. I yelled, my voice trembling with years of pent-up frustration, and told her I knew she'd cheated with a coworker. She tried to play it off, her face a mask of indignation, accusing me of overreacting, of being paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I shoved the evidence in her face, those texts, those memories burned into my brain, and she stopped. All the yelling, all the deflecting, it melted away. In that moment, the reality of her actions hit her, and the woman who had been so defensive moments earlier was suddenly small and broken. She started crying, but I had no more sympathy left. I couldn't stand to be around her, not with all the lies, all the betrayal still fresh in my mind. So I left. I needed air, space, anything but her. I went to my sister's house that night trying to figure out what to do next. Christmas was right around the corner, and the last thing I wanted was to ruin the kids' holiday. I came back home a few days later, but only for them. Jennifer and I hardly spoke, the tension between us thick as ice. Then I dropped the bomb. I told her that as soon as the new year hit, I would be filing for divorce. Her tears flowed freely, but there was no comfort I could offer her. She begged me, asking how she would manage without me. "Who will drive me to work? Who will help me with the kids?" she cried. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. After everything she had done, that's what she was worried about? I told her to ask her affair partner. Her sobs grew louder, more desperate. Suddenly, the woman who had spent years neglecting me, betraying me, was now pleading for a second chance. She suggested marriage counseling, swearing we could work through this. But I couldn't unsee the texts, couldn't unfeel the sting of betrayal that had become my constant companion. It was too late. I told her that when I file, I'm seeking full custody of the kids. I'm done being the fool. I'm done being the backup plan. I'll also be going after alimony and child support because why should I let her walk away from the wreckage she created without any consequences? 25 years of my life wasted, that's what it feels like. As the story goes, I was with my girlfriend Emily for nearly 3.5 years. We had our ups and downs like any couple, but we had built something real, or so I thought. Then she betrayed me with someone I never imagined she would, someone I knew all too well, a guy named Mark. And they were sneaking around behind my back for almost 2 years. Mark and I met through a sport we were both passionate about. We clicked easily, like brothers, drawn together by shared interests. It's strange to look back now and realize that at the time I met him, I had already been dating Emily for a little over a year. I never thought anything of it. Why would I? Mark was the kind of guy who seemed harmless, a little too simple-minded maybe, but someone I trusted. Emily, though, she had a way of getting involved in everything. At first, she was just curious about my training sessions. She said she wanted to come and watch. I was happy to have her there at first, but something about it started feeling off after a while. She wasn't just there to support me. It was like she was there for someone else. I could see it in the way she looked at Mark, the way she acted differently when he was around. It was subtle, but it was there. Small shifts in her energy, things she probably thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. And looking back now, I realize how naive I was to ignore the red flags. Mark, of all people. He wasn't even someone impressive. In fact, he was probably one of the dullest, most unambitious people I'd ever met. I was the one who had built something solid in our relationship. I was loyal, reliable, and I provided her with a sense of security. But that wasn't enough. And maybe, I started to think, it was never going to be. It all started unraveling when I hit a rough patch in life. I'd quit my job after too much mistreatment and found myself unemployed for a couple of months. Emily must have seen it as her chance to get away with things behind my back. While I was struggling, trying to figure out my next steps, she was off, building her secret relationship with Mark. She didn't even try to hide it well. They were messaging each other constantly on social media, hanging out in secret. It turned out he would pick her up right from our house, and I had no idea. They went to the gym together, had lunch dates, went paddle boarding, watched the sunset like they were some happy couple. She even sent him intimate pictures, the kind she used to send only to me. I found out about the pictures because she was careless. She sent one to me by mistake and told me she had sent it to him too. That was my breaking point. I made it clear to her, either she cuts him off completely or we were done. Simple as that. But she didn't cut him off. Instead, she shut me out. She turned off her location tracking, ignored my calls and texts, stopped spending time with me. No more affection, no more sex, no more anything. It was like I didn't exist. She became a stranger in her own skin. I knew where this was heading, but part of me didn't want to believe it. Then came the night that shattered everything. I was out helping coach a group of kids when Emily sent me a text. "I'm going out with Mark. I'll be home before you finish." I didn't think too much of it at the time. But when I got home around 7, her car was still in the driveway, but she wasn't there. He had picked her up again. The same thing had happened the night before, and I was clueless. I stayed up that night waiting, ready to end things the moment she walked through the door. But she never came home. At 11:30 p.m., she finally texted, "We need to talk." I knew what was coming. I asked her not to break up with me over a text message, but that didn't stop her. She didn't care. And while I was leaving our house to clear my head, she and Mark were already at my old place, spending the night together. He had the audacity to claim he was protecting her from me, as if I had ever laid a hand on her or anyone else. I'm a police officer, for God's sake. I've never hurt anyone. I don't do drugs, and I rarely drink. But there they were, spending the night together while I was left alone in the wreckage of what we had. Mark even had the nerve to say he slept on the couch. Sure, I believed that. For 6 months, they were lying to my face, playing me for a fool. 3 weeks after we officially broke up, they were already parading around as a couple, posting about their new love on social media, flaunting it. I blocked them both long before, but mutual friends couldn't help but tell me. I've since told those friends to stop updating me. I don't need to know anymore. Mark even tried to get me to unblock him, asking friends to reach out on his behalf. He claimed he wanted to clear the air, to make things right. But when we're at training, he won't even look at me. He can't stand to be in the same room alone with me. Coward. Emily was gone long before she finally ended things, but the hardest part is that she kept pretending. She would say over and over that she wanted to fix things, to work on our relationship. But when I told her she needed to stop seeing Mark, she would turn it around on me. I was insecure, I was overreacting. I never let her have any friends. Classic, narcissistic behavior. I guess what I'm still trying to figure out is why she put me through an entire year of hell. If she had already checked out, why not leave? Why torture me with lies and false hope when all she wanted was to be with someone else? Why not just walk away a year ago to be with that piece of garbage? At the end of it all, I asked her for something I thought was reasonable. Closure. After spending 3.5 years together, the least we could do was say goodbye face to face, right? It felt like a simple request after everything that had happened. But she ignored me, dodging my messages for 2 whole days. When she finally did respond, she said she was afraid. Afraid I would hurt her, afraid I'd yell. I couldn't believe it. Hurt her? Yell? I had never in my entire life so much as raised my voice to anyone I cared about. That's just not who I am, and she knew it. But the more she avoided me, the clearer it became that she was hiding behind her excuses. It was easier for her to paint me as some kind of threat rather than face the mess she had created. After days of her dodging me, I finally reached my breaking point. I told her, "Meet me at the park at exactly 7 p.m. If you don't show up, I'm done. I'm leaving, and I'm blocking you on everything." I wasn't going to let her string me along any longer. She didn't respond, so I went to the park anyway, arriving early at 6:30. I sat there, my mind racing, trying to sort through all the emotions swirling around inside me. I kept hoping, against my better judgment, that she would show up. But as the minutes ticked by, that hope faded. When the clock hit 7, I knew I was done. I sent her a message. "I waited for 30 minutes and you didn't show up. I'm putting the spare keys in the mailbox. Goodbye." And then, just like that, she started blowing up my phone. Suddenly, she had something to say. "You said around 7, not on 7, she texted, as if those extra few minutes changed anything, as if she hadn't been avoiding me for days. I told her to reread what I had sent her. Then, without waiting for a response, I blocked her on everything. It was over. The whole situation with Mark, God, it still eats at me. I had known him for 2 years through our training. I had welcomed him into my home, introduced him to my life. We had shared drinks, gone out, laughed like friends. I thought he was someone I could trust, but he had wormed his way into everything, into my relationship, and I hadn't seen it coming. Or maybe I had. Maybe deep down, I always knew something was off. Looking back now, I know I should have seen the signs with Emily. She was a narcissist, plain and simple. But I was too blind to notice, too caught up in trying to make things work. Still, part of me had always known. Watching the way she interacted with Mark, there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that told me something was going to happen between them. I just didn't want to believe it. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I've been torn apart. It's been only a month since everything came crashing down, and the pain is still fresh. People keep telling me I'll be fine without her, that I'll get through this. And yeah, I know I will. But right now, it sucks. Never in a million years would I have dreamed of doing something like this to anyone. The betrayal cuts deep. And now Mark, he's spreading lies about me, telling anyone who will listen that I used to beat Emily and that I have a drinking problem. It's laughable, really, because he doesn't even have the courage to say any of it to my face. Every time we're at training, he avoids me like the plague, won't even make eye contact. He's terrified to be in the same room with me. Sure, Emily's the bigger part of the problem here, 90% of it, no doubt. But Mark? He's not innocent. He's that slimy 10% who slid into my life pretending to be a friend while stabbing me in the back the whole time. It's mind-blowing how people like them can act so casually about destroying someone else's life. I've got more details if you want them, but right now I just need to know why. Why didn't she break it off sooner? Why string me along, making me question everything, when it would have been so easy for her to leave? Why couldn't she respect one simple boundary? To just drop one person, to let go of Mark, so we could work on us? Why did she shut me out, both mentally and physically, for so long? Why make me feel like I was the one doing everything wrong, like I was worthless and incapable of doing a single thing right? Why make the one person you're supposed to love feel like the absolute worst version of themselves? Hey everyone. Yeah, you heard that right. My girlfriend cheated on me, even though I was doing everything I could to build a future for us. We had been together for about 5 years. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but nothing I thought was too serious. But let me take you back to the beginning, so you can get a better idea of what went wrong. If any of you have some insight on whether I was in the wrong or if she was, feel free to be brutally honest. I'm ready for it. At the time, I was living about 4 or 5 hours away from her. We had matched on a dating app while I was visiting her city. She messaged me a couple of months later, and from there, things just took off. We eventually decided to meet up for a weekend. We slept together, but we didn't have any deep conversation about where things were going. No talks of romance or becoming a couple. We just kept chatting like before. 2 days after I got home from that weekend, I slept with another girl. Yeah, I know, not exactly my proudest moment. The other girl was a friend I'd had a casual thing with years ago, but we hadn't seen each other in a long time. When I was back with my girlfriend, that same girl messaged me, just asking how I was doing, and I told my girlfriend that she was just an old friend. Technically, that was true. But it didn't take long for her to dig around, and she ended up messaging the girl. And of course, the girl told her that we had slept together. My girlfriend went ballistic, accusing me of all sorts of things. Things started getting weird after that. One night, while I was out with some friends, my girlfriend told me she was going out too. But she didn't say where or with who, which was strange because she usually told me those details. I was already feeling suspicious, so I reached out to her friend, Emily, who told me she wasn't with her and that my girlfriend had asked her to cover for her. That set off major alarm bells, but for some reason, I didn't push it. I wanted to trust her. But just recently, I found out that she had actually slept with another guy back then, even though she denied it for years. All this time, she had been throwing the whole friends with benefits situation in my face, tearing me apart over it, and it turns out she was probably guilty the entire time. Maybe that's why she kept harping on it. Out of guilt? In the beginning of our relationship, she broke up with me twice, just to test if I cared enough. Both times, it destroyed me. I cried for hours, shattered into a million pieces. And then she'd turn everything around, making it seem like I was the problem. Once, she even lied about being pregnant just to see if I'd stick around. I found out because I reverse-searched the photo she sent me. It wasn't even hers. Despite all this, I kept trying to do nice things for her. I'd bring her flowers, get her chocolates, plan little weekend getaways. But her reaction, every single time she'd say, "That's so lame," without even thanking me. One time I came home early from work, made the bed with rose petals, set out chocolates, all the romantic stuff. She walked right past me, got into bed, and told me she was going to sleep. Nothing I did seemed to matter. Whenever we had a disagreement, she wouldn't talk to me directly. Instead, she'd post cryptic messages on social media, airing out our issues for everyone to see. I tried everything to get her to talk, calling, texting, sitting in the dark just to create a safe space for conversation. But she always had an excuse. 5 years into this roller coaster, she told me she didn't love me anymore. She was seeing someone else, talking to someone new, and then she broke up with me. I tried moving on, met a new girl on a dating site, and we took things slow. Didn't even sleep together until the 5th date because honestly, I wasn't ready. But she was incredible. I hadn't felt that kind of warmth in years. She made me feel like I was coming home whenever she hugged me. She was kind, loving, and selfless in ways I had forgotten were possible. But just when I thought I was moving forward, my ex texted me, and like a fool, I broke it off with the new girl and started talking to my ex again. She asked if I had been with anyone while we were apart, and I lied. I told her no. She claimed she hadn't either, and said she would have told me if she had because she's honest. I later found out that she had been on dating sites the whole time, even while we were supposedly working things out. She had slept with someone, but what really got to me was how she kept hammering on about her honesty while she was living a double life. Still, I kept trying to make things work. I had to leave the country for work for a couple of months, and we tried to rebuild while I was away. I told her about the girl I had briefly seen, and my ex went off the rails, claiming we were still in a relationship during that time. Except we weren't. She had said she didn't love me and was seeing someone else. One time while I was overseas, I called her, and I heard her laughing with someone in the background. They were shushing each other, and there was even moaning. She denied everything, of course, but I knew what I had heard. Still, somehow, we decided to give it one last shot. About 6 months ago, we agreed to try again and work things through. But here's the thing. I had taken a job that required me to work abroad, 2 weeks on and 1 week off. I'd come home to see her during my time off, and I'd visit my family too. One day, she told me she had gone off the pill because she wanted to start a family. I was over the moon. If there was one thing I had always wanted in life, it was to be a dad. Fast forward to about 3 months ago, I saw something that hit me hard. She posted a story on Instagram that said something about how she loved when a guy rides a bike and has pretty eyes. I don't ride a bike, so naturally I asked her about it. She brushed it off, saying it was just something she liked, but deep down, my gut told me something was off. Eventually, I found out the truth. She was sleeping with her brother's friend. And all this while she was supposedly off the pill, which had me spiraling. I had no idea what could have happened, and when I confronted her about it, she called me delusional, an idiot, and worse. The gaslighting was so strong, I almost believed I was imagining everything. As time went on, the red flags piled up. She stopped texting me in the morning, wouldn't say goodnight, and our conversations went from warm and full of energy to cold, distant, and almost robotic. It felt like she was a million miles away, emotionally checked out. I would pour my heart into our texts, into trying to keep things alive, and in return, I got the cold shoulder every single time. By September, it had gotten so bad that when I'd ask her where she was, all she would say was, "I'm out," without any details. Hours would go by with no word from her. My gut told me something was seriously wrong. Then one night, she casually dropped the bomb that she was talking to someone. A few days later, it was her birthday. She got mad at me, asking why I hadn't posted anything on Facebook about her, like, "Why didn't you say happy birthday to my amazing girlfriend," or something like that? I didn't even know how to respond. I told her, "You literally just said you're talking to someone else." She then tried to brush it off, saying the guy was gay and that he was just listening to her problems. But I asked her, "Why couldn't you talk to me about it then?" She had no answer. Instead, she would finish work, ignore my texts, and not respond for hours, sometimes until the early morning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played, but whenever I brought it up, she'd just call me delusional and act like I was crazy for even thinking that way. Finally, she broke up with me, and the truth came spilling out. Around that time, she reached out again, saying she was pregnant. Then, just as quickly, she blocked me on everything. Phone, social media, everything. I tried desperately to get her to talk to me, and when she finally did, she told me she was keeping the baby and that I would never see it. I reverse-searched the image she sent me of the pregnancy test and confronted her when we met in person. She admitted it was all a lie. She just wanted to see how I would react, to see if I even cared. But she kept up the lie, insisting she had been pregnant just to keep me hooked in her twisted game. Then she confessed the most painful thing of all. She had slept with her brother's friend to get back at me. She was seeing this new guy while we were still together, but she claimed it wasn't serious at first. She said she cheated out of spite, and when I asked her why, she didn't even have a real answer. She admitted she had been with her brother's friend too, all to hurt me. And I was left standing there completely broken, wondering why she would do any of this. I remember asking her why she was calling me a narcissist, why she thought I was this terrible person she claimed I was. But she couldn't give me a real reason, just that I was. It was like she was reaching for any excuse to justify her actions. Then she said something that really twisted the knife. She told me none of this would have happened if I had just put a ring on her finger, as if all this betrayal, all the lies, were somehow my fault because I hadn't proposed. Then she had the nerve to send me a TikTok about why women cheat. The video talked about how women cheat for validation, and she told me this new guy had called her pretty. I couldn't believe it. I had been calling her beautiful every single day, reminding her how much she meant to me. And still, she chose someone else to fill some void I didn't even know existed. When I brought it up, she said things like, "What did you expect after what you did?" But I still don't understand what I did that was so wrong. I was loyal to her even after everything she put me through. And don't even get me started on her friends. They're a nightmare, a reflection of her, really. All of them are bad news. They cheat on their boyfriends like it's a game. They lie about being pregnant. They manipulate and they think it's all some sort of power move. One of her friends is just the most disgusting human being I've ever encountered. It's no surprise that her circle is just as toxic as she is now. At the end of the day, it feels like her only weapon against me was sex. She could never show real emotion, never tell me what she was truly feeling. All she knew was how to hurt me, over and over again, with her lies, her cheating, and her games. And I'm still left here wondering, was she ever hurting too? Or did she do all of this just because she could?
Oh my God. Another really good one. I really hope you enjoyed this Reddit story video. I had a great time reading this. If you want more of this kind of content, just leave a comment. Let me know. Follow my channel. I'm really trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. And we can do it. It's going to happen, guys. Thank you so much. Now, everybody have a great night and have a sweet dreams.